Welcome to Career Solutions with David Rawls, your guide to improving the quality of your career. David will share tips for career success, faith-based tips for locating, landing jobs, and succeeding at your work. Join your host, David Rawls, who brings more than 30 years' experience working for GTE and Disney, as he helps you with your career solutions.
Hello. Welcome. Glad you're here tonight. I'm so excited that we're finally getting into some of the meat of this session. We've had several weeks of some good foundational stuff that was important that we go through, and tonight is the first of two sessions that we're going to be talking about resumes. We're going to be talking about two resumes, the tale of two resumes, both the oral resume and the written resume. And there's a distinct difference between the two, and there's some commonalities between the two. We'll be talking about those. Our scriptural foundation for this evening comes out of 1 Kings in the Old Testament, chapter 11, verse 41. As for the other events of Solomon's reign, all he did and the wisdom he displayed, are they not written in the book of the annals of Solomon? Back during biblical times and back clear back to Solomon's time, it was only the kings that had a resume. It was only the kings, it was those real important people that actually had something written about their background, something about their lives, something about their capabilities and their purpose. Today, almost all of us have something. We've got a written resume, we've got a Facebook page, we've got a LinkedIn profile, and perhaps we have all of those things and more that sort of chronicles what it is we've done, perhaps how well we've done it, some of the major events in our lives, and we're going to be talking about how that all plays into our job search, how we utilize our backgrounds, our skills, our capabilities, and the resume on one level is a marketing document. It's a way in which we put out the word about ourselves to other people, and that will become, I think, evident as we go through this. So tonight, clearly, we're talking about the tale of two resumes. Will Rogers once said, and I hope you remember this, Will Rogers once said, "The more you say, the less people remember." Now, that's a principle that we're going to use for both our oral and our written resume. If I have one major critique, probably the most often critique that I've ever used, and I have worked with thousands and thousands and thousands of job seekers, the single most frequent critique that I have of the oral resume is, you say too much. The most single critique that I have of the written resume is, you say too much. We're so worried about leaving something out that might be of value that we try and cram our oral resume, we try and cram our written resume with everything we can possibly think of. It's almost as if we're afraid that if we don't get enough in there, we won't get the job. Now, I want to take this to a scriptural verse which really parallels what Will Rogers said in his quote. This is out of Proverbs 10:19. When words are many, sin is not absent, but he who holds his tongue is wise. The idea here is we can say too much. I've seen job seekers who have talked themselves into and out of consideration. In the little video clip that you saw starring Terry Sullivan, as he was going through literally hundreds of resumes to find that one in a million, the single biggest critique is there's way too much stuff on the page. And you sell yourself and then unsell yourself all in one very quick 10 or 15 second event. It's been said by many, and I've never measured this to be true, but I can tell you as a recruiter, this rings true to me from my own personal experience. The average resume is screened in somewhere between 6 and 15 seconds, which means if we write too much, there's a very good chance that they'll be reading the wrong stuff and not the stuff that they really need to read. So we need to find out what's important to put on the resume. How do we then put it there so that it's seen and gleaned and digested and has a positive effect? And what we're trying to do is whet the interviewer's appetite so they learn just enough about us to want to bring us in to learn more. Remember, the purpose of the resume is not to get the job, it's to get the interview. And I think a lot of us have been confused about that in times past. Now, there's two resumes, as I said. When do we use these? There's a purpose for each. There's a design of each. They are actually designed a little bit differently, and I'm not talking the difference between oral and written. They're laid out differently. Even if you were to write the oral one out, it's laid out very, very differently than the written resume. And they're developed a little bit differently. And so we'll be talking about each of those, the oral and the written resume. Now, let's first talk about some of the commonalities that they have. The first thing they have is they have a common purpose. The purpose is to represent you, Inc. The purpose is to be your sales brochure, your sales slogan, your sales lingo. It's that small marketing piece that makes an impact for you as a potential candidate for a job, whether it's done orally or whether it's done in writing. Or I should say, done orally and done in writing. We all need both. There are many job seekers that have some remnant or facsimile of a written resume, and not a lot of people go to the trouble to develop the oral resume, and I hope I make an impact on you in this session so that you'll recognize the purpose, the reason to have it, and the import. The oral resume is every bit as important as the written resume for different reasons, but every bit as important. So we're going to talk about the purpose of each, which is obviously to sell you, the content, the features, and the benefits that go in each of these. And we're obviously, the common focus is your job target. Both the oral and written resume need to have a focus. Now, when I use the term focus, and you're going to hear me now in the next several sessions, probably for the next 6 sessions that we do in here as we go through resumes, networking, and interviewing, I'm going to be using this term focus, and I use it intentionally. I use it in place of the word job target. Your job focus is your target. It's what you're aimed at. It's that thing you're trying to hit. And it needs to be very, very specifically defined. So when somebody reads your resume, they need to know in a matter of seconds, 5 seconds, exactly the kind of job you're looking for. Some of your resumes I look at, now if I were to spend 2 minutes on them, I couldn't figure out. Oh, I could find out what jobs you had in the past, but I don't know too many recruiters or hiring managers who say just because you did this job for 5 years and this job for 7 years and this job for 3 years, I don't want to guess what it is you want to do next. Especially if I have a broad array of potential positions. So we need to know, as a job seeker, what your target is, your focus. Same thing in your oral resume. We need to know what your focus is, and it needs to be very, very specific. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we want you to be best marketed, we want you to be best advertised, and we want you to be best prepared, and you will be the best in those things if you go to the trouble to spend some time up front developing both of these resumes, the oral and the written resume. Now, there's a few things that are uncommon between the two. And the biggest uncommonality between the two is when it's used. The written resume, I think we probably all would agree, the written resume is oftentimes provided to somebody for the purpose of trying to get an interview. So it might be passed on to a HR recruiter or a hiring manager or somebody who has the responsibility of deciding all the potential candidates that are out there. These are the ones that we might want to bring in to talk to, and this larger group over here, these are the ones that we're not going to spend time with. That's oftentimes decided as a result of the written resume. Now, the oral resume is not used in many cases where you think it might be used. You might say, well, why is it called a resume? Well, I don't know what else to call it. It basically is an oral representation of your background and prospectively where you're headed. Same thing the written resume is. But the oral resume is most often used in 2 different circumstances. The first one is this, you need to get this. It's the answer to the most frequently asked question in this planet and probably in the entire solar system. And that question is, and you all have heard it, this is not a surprise to 95% of you, and the question is, tell me about yourself. It's usually right up at the beginning of the interview. It's usually in the job interview, and they'll say something like, tell me about yourself. What brings you here today? Why do you find yourself in a job search? There's perhaps hundreds of ways to ask the question, but it's all, tell me about yourself. And here's one of the reasons they're doing it. They're basically giving you a blank canvas on which you're to give a high-level view, paint a picture about you, and we say, and you need to do it in 2 minutes or less, which is why I refer to this as the 2-minute drill. More on the drill in a minute. But the point is, you've got a limited amount of time to share a little bit about your history and a little bit about where you're headed, and it's used usually at the top of the interview. If it's not the interviewer's first question, it's usually one of the first few. And I would venture to say somewhere between 95 and 99% of all interviewers use that question or some variation of it. So you need to be listening for it. And let me say this, it is the single best opportunity you have in an interview. For a couple of reasons. One, you know that it's coming almost all the time, which means you can prepare an answer ahead of time. Now, think about this. When are we most nervous in an interview? At the beginning, exactly. We're most nervous at the beginning. And so if we have a pre-prepared answer for one of those very first questions, we've learned it and we memorize it and we get to the point where we can say it very comfortably and very conversationally, when we get that first question, we can respond with confidence. We can respond with conciseness. When you're unprepared, here's what I've noticed in job seeker after job seeker. Somebody says, tell me about yourself, and you're still talking 8 minutes later, 10 minutes later. You're basically thinking that's the open-ended question from which they're going to base all of your information, and so you try to give them the entire interview and an answer to the first question. All they want is a high-level overview in most cases. I'll tell you why in a little bit. But it's important for us to recognize that it ought to be 2 minutes or less, not 5 or 10 or 12 minutes. So the written resume is used to give to someone to help us become qualified for or encourage somebody to bring us in for an interview. The oral resume is used, first instance, it's used to answer that most frequently asked question. Tell me about yourself. It's an organized, succinct, crisp way to talk about what you've done and where you're going, your job target. The second use of the oral resume, the 2-minute drill as I call it, is for networking purposes. I can't tell you how many times I've been in networking groups. I was speaking to a networking group earlier today. And you meet people, and what kind of work are you looking for? What do you do? These people go all over the place. The string of conversation just is kind of meandering, never-ending, nowhere. And so by the time I'm done talking to these people, they have a potential networking connection that they're talking to. And when we're done with the conversation, I still don't know where they're headed. I don't know what their job target is, and I don't know what qualifies them. Even if I knew their job target, I don't know what qualifies them to get that job. So I can't help them. If I'm a good potential networking connection, I don't know enough about them to even refer them to people that might be good contacts. And that's one of the reasons we network with people. So we want to use our 2-minute drill in a very different way than we would use our 2-page resume. But they're both very, very important. Let's go back and talk about what it is we have to sell. And these are important distinctions, whether we're doing our 2-page or our 2-minute drill, our 2-page resume, written or oral. There's 2 sides of each of us that we have to sell. And most job seekers only focus on the first one. It's the being side. We're called human beings. Who are we being? It's all about our capabilities and talents and gifts that we possess. It's about the credentials. It's about our character traits and the associations that we belong to. That's the being side. It's who we are as an individual, as a being. It's what we bring to the party. If we're going to a potential employer, the employer wants to know, what is it you're bringing? Don't tell me about all the baggage, that's the negative stuff. Right now I want you to tell me about all the good stuff that you bring to us. Well, I have 12 years of experience doing this, and I have my bachelor's degree and my master's degree and a certification in this, and I belong to this group and that group. And so you begin to characterize all the things that you are, the being part of you. But there's another side to you, and you need to get as much of this in balance in your resume and ultimately in your interview discussion, and that's the doing side of you. The doing side of you is how well you use what you bring to the party. See, I'd like to say that I would hire people if they had a bachelor's degree in finance, if I had a financial manager's job open, but I know people with bachelor's degree in finance that couldn't manage their way out of the finances of a popcorn stand. I know people that have certifications and degrees in this, that, and the other that I wouldn't hire. So it's not just about credentials. It's about how well we use. If you have a degree, how well have you used your education to prove that it's of some value to us as a potential employer? If you have 12 years of experience, did you grow in your 12 years of experience in this profession? Or as some people say, do you have 1 year of experience repeated 12 times? Because there's a big difference. The fact that you've been doing the job for 12 years doesn't necessarily mean you have 12 years of experience. You may only have 1. You may only have 2 months of experience. And so this whole notion of it's how well you use what you bring to the party that's so important to many employers. You might say this is the result side. It's the doing side. So we've got the being side, that's who you are, and then the doing side, what you've done with who you are. What you've done with what it is you've developed and spent time accumulating over the past 2, 5, 10, 12, 25, 35 years, whatever. And it's important that we share both the being and the doing side, and recognizing that we have both of these sides of us that we need to well balance in terms of how we represent ourselves to the employer or employers. We want to make sure that we get good balance between these. We don't want to just talk about doing, but results are important. I can't tell you how many recruiters I talk to and hiring managers that say, I get these great resumes with all these credentials, but there's not one result, not one achievement listed on the resume. They tell me what their responsibilities are. As an admin, they answered the phone. My first question is, how well? They typed letters. My question is, how well? They spent time providing customer service assistance to customers that would call in. How well? I've worked with customer service agents that are probably very experienced customer service agents, and I didn't feel well treated at all by the time I hung up the phone. So the fact that they have the experience is only half of it. It's how well did you do it? And so we need to be thinking about, of course, results and getting the balance of each. Now, speaking of admin assistance, which it's about having some savvy with what you do. There's a story about the recent, there was a password audit done at a recent high-tech company. And it was found that the receptionist who was in the front, this person dealt with a lot of people, answered the phones, greeted everybody as they came through the door. The receptionist was using the following password on her PC. This is the password: Mickey, Minnie, Pluto, Huey, Louie, Dewey, Donald, Goofy, Sacramento. Now that's one heck of a password to type in every time you have to type in a password. When asked why she had such a long password, she gave a very simple, straightforward answer. She said when she hired in, she was told that her password had to be at least 8 characters long and include 1 capital. We have a little bit of an understanding problem and a communication problem there. Okay, let's move on to something that's equally as important by virtue of a foundation here. And how many of you ever had CB radios. You remember the era of CB radios. Obviously, it's for young people. They may not even remember these. But CB radios were all the rage. Truckers have been using them for years. And then they became something very popular. People began to put them in their automobiles. And then people, as they were driving around, had these little CB radios. I don't know what the distance they could communicate. But one of the important things in having a CB radio is you didn't use your name typically. You had a handle, a nickname, if you will. These handles were oftentimes reflective of your gifts, your talents. They were very unique to you. It wasn't like you had 6 people out there on their CB radio saying, "Hi, this is Tom." Somebody else says, "Yeah, this is Tom too." Somebody else says, "Yeah." And so somebody comes on after 5 Toms have introduced themselves, and you say, "Oh, okay, which Tom do I need to talk to?" One of you guys mentioned a good place to eat. Which Tom was it? No, everybody had very unique handles. They were typically 1, 2, or 3 words at the most. They were very, very short. It might be handles like Silver Fox. Maybe it was somebody who had gray hair. Big Red might have been my handle, because back when I was young and CB radios were out, I had fire engine red hair as a young man. And my nickname was Torch when I was in college. Well, it was one of my nicknames. It's one of the few I'm willing to talk about. And they called me Torch because my hair looked like it was on fire all the time. So it's just, and that might have been a good handle on a CB radio. I never had a CB radio, but that might have been a handle that I would have picked, because I also, since I share the last name with Lou Rawls, my fraternity nickname was Lou. And so I might have picked Lou the Torch, or Torch Lou, or something along those lines, trying to come up with a unique identifier as a handle. These had a lot to do with our reputation, how we were known by people close to us, and something that we knew that when somebody called us out on the CB radio in a strange voice, and we heard our name called, we knew it was us and only us. It was that unique. There weren't a whole bunch of Toms, Dicks, and Harrys out there. Everybody had a unique CB handle. Now, what I want to encourage us to do is to think about handles that might be appropriate for us, and there's a reason that I'm going to have us go through this, handles that would be appropriate for us professionally. If we had to come up with unique identifiers, what 1 or 2 or at the most 3-word handles might you think of for yourself? And I want each job seeker to come up with a minimum of 12, maybe as many as 15 or more, that might be unique to you, and they can be terms that are made up terms. They don't even have to be real things. They don't have to be real nouns. I'm going to give you an example of a few in just a moment. One more foundational step. In addition to the handles, I want us to be thinking about our accomplishments. If we're going to do a good job of sharing the doing side of us, the second side of us that's very, very important to many hiring managers and human resource staffing people, talent acquisition people, hiring managers as well. They want to know what we've accomplished. And so when we think about our accomplishments, I want you to begin to start to make a list. I'm amazed at the number of job seekers that have never thought about this. Either they've never had to, or they've never made themselves do it. But I want to encourage you, if you're looking for work, it's a necessity today for you to be thinking about what it is you bring to the party, what it is you did with what you bring to the party. Don't tell me you had customer service experience. Tell me about a time when you were really good at it. Don't tell me that you're a team player. Give me an example of when you were on a team that had superb results. So we have to be thinking about not only what we did, what our responsibilities were, but how well we accomplished some of those responsibilities. If you were we had a receptionist in our facility years ago, a lot of phone calls coming into that place. We had about 2,000 people in this one facility. And we had direct in dial, but a lot of calls came into the switchboard, and our receptionist, one of her main objectives was to catch every call before the second ring stopped ringing. And she was really, really good. Nobody had to wait and have the phone ring. And how many times do we call today businesses and it rings and rings and rings and rings, and then it goes to voicemail. And we wouldn't allow our switchboard calls to go to voicemail. And so that was one of her measures of success. One of her measures of success is she got every call, every call. Another one of her measures of successes was attendance. She could say that in her 6 years in our company, she never took a sick day. Now, I'm not saying that we can all do that, but that was an accomplishment for her. She worked hard at staying healthy. She worked hard at if there were days when she didn't feel like quite getting out of bed, wasn't feeling 100%, she got herself up, got herself ready, and came to work and struggled through the days sometimes when not feeling 100%. All of us wouldn't be that dedicated. That was an accomplishment for her. That was something that was important to her. Now, I'm giving you some rather mundane accomplishments. You guys think of the accomplishments that and I want you to start creating a list. Name your 5 most significant responsibilities, and then give me an example of when you did that, each one of those, really well. Because if you're applying for a job and they're going to hire somebody, and you're applying for a job that somebody needs to be able to roof a house, and you say, oh boy, I've roofed lots of houses. You need to give them an example of how fast you did it, how well you did it, some qualitative or quantitative result of how good a roofer you are. Well, I roofed 17 houses in a half hour one day. We know that's ludicrous, of course, but the point is, you need to be thinking how you can express what you did in results fashion. It's important to everybody who's going to consider you for work. They're not going to hire you because you can do it. They're going to hire you because you're one of the best at it. People aren't out there hiring folks just because they're going to show up. They're breathing, they're warm, and they're going to put in their time. People are looking for folks for increased productivity all the time. And especially in today's world, where there's perhaps more people looking for work than there are jobs available in many markets, they can afford to be very choosy. We're going to hire the best. So you need, and I know that you all have accomplishments. You haven't figured out yet how to put them down on paper, how to express them orally so that you can have an impact with what you've accomplished. Some of them perhaps are measurable results. I've given you a couple of illustrations. Now, once we get all of our handles, and again, I'm going to suggest you come up with 12 to 15, and then once you get all of your accomplishments written down, and if you haven't started doing this, I hope you start writing them down right now, even if you have to rewrite them, even if you have to ash can some of them and perhaps come up with some new ones, start thinking about the things that you've done well and start writing them down right now. And use this starting of your list to come up with more. And then you're going to come up with your very best. And then, so you've got your handles, all the things that you might be positively known for in your work. 1, 2, 3 word handles, and you've got all your results. And then the idea is, and I suggest you have a list of your handles on one side of the page and a list of your results on the other. And after you get them both listed down the page, then what you do is you start drawing lines between them. This handle goes with this result. This handle goes with this result. And you start connecting the dots between them. And the idea is you're going to come up with what I call the 1-2 punch. It's that combination of handle and accomplishment which can have real power in your resume. And this is an example off of one of my earlier resumes. If I were looking for a VP of HR position again, this would be one of the handles and accomplishments that I would have listed on the top half, and I'll show you how this all works in a little bit, but would be on the top half of the first page of the resume. Quality leader is the handle. Nothing fancy about the language. You don't know totally what it means. That's the handle. And then the accomplishment helps show how quality leader comes alive. And this is what would be our company won the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award. Some of you may know about that, others may not. It's certainly one of the most prestigious business awards given in the United States of America, and they've been handing it out basically since the late 70s, early 80s. They give out, I think they've increased the number now. When we won the award, they were giving out up to 6, maximum of 6 per year. 2 in small business, 2 in large business, and 2 in what they call the service sector. And so, and I think they've added a nonprofit education group now with a couple of awards. So perhaps as many as 8 now for the whole country. And to win it is quite prestigious because the application it was then, again, I don't know if it's changed, the application itself was like 78 pages long. Just to have the judges come out and look at your business, you had to pass the application process. And so if an employer were looking for an executive HR person who was going to be helpful in creating a climate, a quality climate in organizations where they could improve the quality of all the work that they were doing, this would get me an interview. If quality was important. The reason you need several of these is once you find out what's important to the interviewer, what's important to the hiring manager, what's important to that particular employer that you're sending your resume, then you hand pick the 1-2 punches that best fit what that employer is looking for, which kind of spills the beans a little bit on a point that I'm going to make in a little bit, and that is you have to customize every single resume to the employer that you're sending it to. 2 different employers, 2 different companies might be hiring a sales manager, very generic title, and you think if you've been a sales manager, you can use the same resume showing that you were a sales manager for both of those companies, and yet one of those companies may be looking for a sales manager who knows a lot about sales and how to train salespeople. Makes sense. The other company might be looking for a sales manager who knows a lot about technology and can technologically advance the company in terms of how it runs all of its sales processes. Matter of fact, another company may be looking for a sales manager who's not particularly a good salesperson, but a great person of encouragement, a great leader, a great inspirer, but they couldn't sell anything themselves if they had to. And there are some good sales managers like that aren't necessarily good salespeople, but they're great leaders. So you've got to find out what that company is looking for, even though it's a generic title, and then you've got to position yourself to have those skills, those backgrounds, and those accomplishments that employer is looking for. And those that are not customizing their resumes are the ones that aren't getting interviews. And I know there are people in this audience that have been sending out resumes for months, if not years. How many interviews you had in the last 6 months? Oh, maybe 2. You're sending the wrong resume to the wrong people. And I'm not at all saying your background is bad. It's not. You're just not getting the right stuff down for the right employer. I mean, that's one logical response to why you're not getting the interviews that you desire so much. Here's another example that I saw on a wonderful young lady that I met several years ago. She was a communications manager, an internal communications manager. And I love this, the handle being communications seamstress. And her accomplishment was written out this way: developed and introduced a communication strategy and led implementation of weaving together the mix of written, video, and other employee communications. So clearly she was an employee communications person, not necessarily doing press releases for the outside, external communications. Other employee communications, resulting in a 23% improvement in employee communication. So apparently if I read this and I was looking for a communication manager, I would say, I don't know. She hasn't bothered to try and tell me how they measured this 23% improvement, but a 23% improvement in communications, if I'm really distressed that we're not communicating internally as well as we should be with our employees, and I want somebody who's going to help improve that, seeing that somebody has already had the experience of improving employee. They weren't just an employee communicator. They have a statistical result here. How they measured it, I'm going to bring them in and find out. It may be bogus. But it says a lot more to me than somebody that just says, I was a communication manager, I had responsibility for putting out the company newspaper. That tells me nothing in terms of how good a communicator they are, how effective they were in the job. Well, maybe I'm interested in starting an employee communication process, and maybe I want an employee newsletter, electronic or paper. Haven't gotten that far. I don't even know the benefits or values of both. So I want to bring in a communications person who's got some experience doing that. Well, I've done communication employee newsletters for 12 years. Still doesn't tell me enough. How well did you do it? Did you put out one newsletter a year, one a week, one a month? What kind of feedback do you get? Have you got some testimonials from managers or from employees in terms of how good your process was? Yeah, every time we do a Saturday seminar, which we do every month for our Career Solutions ministry, every time we do a Saturday seminar, we get unsolicited testimonials from people that have been to the seminars, and we keep every one of them because it qualitatively talks about how well we've performed in delivering that seminar. As employees, we need to be thinking about the same. Where do we get our qualitative feedback? Well, sometimes we get it from internal customers in our company. Sometimes it's just oral. I always tell people when they give me an oral compliment, gee, would you mind writing that down? I could write it down, but it'd be a lot more powerful if you wrote it and had your name under it. Or somebody will think I wrote them all. And so you get them documented. How about supervisors in performance appraisals, performance evaluations? Some of us get evaluations annually, sometimes more frequently, sometimes less frequently. There's all kinds of qualitative and quantitative comments on our employee evaluations, and while every evaluation doesn't have all great stuff, there's usually good stuff on there. So if you've kept any of those or can recall any of those or can retrieve any of those, there's probably comments on there that you might be able to somehow rework and reword and use in your resume. How many of you have got, and you don't have to raise your hands, but think about if you've gotten LinkedIn endorsements, if you've gotten LinkedIn recommendations. I think I have 50 or 51 recommendations that have been written up by those that I've come in contact with, and they've actually sent recommendations in, and they usually assign those recommendations to a specific position that you held in your work background. And so I have some recommendations about my book that are on LinkedIn. I have some recommendations about standing up here and teaching this workshop. I have some recommendations on there about when I was the vice president of human resources. Don't have a lot in any of those categories, but all those people sincerely, and I don't solicit recommendations, these are all unsolicited, they've all had some nice things to say. Some of them are more articulate than others, but there's nice stuff in there that I could use on a resume, that I could use in interviews, that obviously if people were searching me out on LinkedIn, those recommendations would have some power for some potential employers if I were looking for work. That applies to all of us in this room. Now, if you look at handout 5.1 in your manuals, handout 5.1 is entitled the 1-2 punch development. It's a one-page handout in here, and it basically divides the page in half. The top half of the page asks you to list 10 possible handles, as we talked about. And it also asks us to list our 10 greatest accomplishments or results. Now, I'm going to suggest that you add a few numbers there and maybe get 12 or 15. Just from my experience since we developed this handout, I think that most of us will need more than 10. So that we can always come up with 3 or 4 for every potential employer we have to send a resume to. And it may be a different 3 or 4 that we pull off this list each time we do a resume. So we're developing a melting pot, if you will, of our accomplishments and our handles. And we can pair those up and use those on our resumes. And again, I'm going to share with you some examples of that 1-2 punch development when we get to looking at resumes. Then in the bottom half of the page, it says where you combine your handle and your accomplishment. And so you've got, as I displayed earlier, the quality leader, the communication seamstress being the handle, and then you put the accomplishment that goes with it. And I know this looks rather lengthy, but this only fills up a couple of lines on a resume. It's only a couple of lines long. It's very, very important, I think, that we understand that we need to get accomplishments, we need to get results, and we need to display them in an appropriate fashion in the written resume. We need to be able to articulate them when we get into our 2-minute drill. And I'm going to be going through the content and the makeup and how we develop both of these after we come back from a short break. So let's take a quick break, about 10 minutes, and we'll come back and we'll continue. This break comes a little bit early tonight. The second half of the session will be a bit longer. So if you need to sign up for the Saturday seminar, which is a week from Saturday, you can do that with Cheryl out front. If anybody has any books they need signed, any of my books, I'd love to be able to do that for you. And let's be back in our seats in 10 minutes, please. Thank you. Let's continue our discussion of resumes, talking about the perspective nature of resumes. Resumes need to be as much future-oriented as they are past-oriented. Most people think that written resumes particularly are a reflection or some sort of historical document, and they are that in part. They're also a prospective or they're a future document. Employers want to see where you're headed. Employers want to see how what you've done applies to what they have for you, potentially as a candidate for a job. They want to know what your job target is. So you can't just tell them, I did this job, I did that job, I did this job over X number of years, and expect, as I said earlier, expect that they're going to try and guess what it is your job target is now. So we need to be thinking as a prospective document, a future-oriented document. Now, the reason that that's important is they want you to have a target because they'd rather have, and I'll put this in the first person, if I'm a hiring manager, I'd rather have someone who wants the job that I've got more than any other job out there, and it needs to be real clear that they covet the job that I've got. It's not that this is one of, well, I could do your job or this job or another job. One of the worst answers you can give if I jump ahead to interviewing is when an employer says, what kind of work you're looking for? And you say, well, I could do anything. And maybe you can, but that's not really their question. Their real question is, what do you have a burning passion to do? That's what they want to know. Because if they had a choice, they'd rather give you the job that you'd rather do it so, you want to do it so much, you'd do it for nothing if that's the only way you could do it. And when somebody will hire you with that kind of passion and that kind of job, they're probably willing to pay you more than average to do it because you've got the passion and intensity to get it done. So what I'm saying here is, with respect to your target, when you decide on what your job target is, those of us that are helping you, your network connections, we'll talk a lot about that in a couple of weeks when we get into networking. If you're going to be an effective networker, everybody you talk to needs to know exactly what kind of job you're looking for. And when I say job target, I'm not talking about, let's use some good examples and some bad examples. A good job target is not something like, I want to be a finance professional. It's not a job target. That's a broad career field. There's probably 250 finance jobs. You could be the chief financial officer, the accounting manager, the accounts receivable supervisor, the payroll clerk, the administrative assistant to the vice president of finance. You could be accounts payable. You could be a treasury. I mean, there's just all kinds of jobs in various functions within finance and in various echelon levels, from entry-level jobs all the way up to the senior positions. Employers want to know which one of those in that vast pyramid of jobs is the one that you're now ready and willing and passionate to get. So saying you're a finance professional isn't it. And you could say that about any functional area. They don't want to know that you're interested in being in sales. Most sales managers believe, and I won't say whether this is true or not, but most sales managers believe that just because you can sell product A doesn't mean you could sell product B or that you could even sell service C. So you not only have to have a sales affinity, but you also have to have some sort of affinity for the product or the service. So the point is, we need to get really specific in our target. We don't want to just help you hit the target. As this slide depicts, we want to help you hit the bullseye of the target. There's no reason for you to settle for less than the bullseye. But you've got to identify for those that are helping you, your network connections, those of us in Career Solutions and elsewhere, you've got to help us understand specifically what your target is down to the job title level. I want to be a payroll supervisor. I want to be a first grade elementary teacher. Don't just say I'm a teacher. What do you want to teach? I'm a coach. What do you coach? What do you coach well? Do you coach at the junior high, the high school level? What kind of coach are you? And so, again, we want to get as specific and as narrowly focused as we can. Now, the reason that this is important to understand is most of us think that if we keep our objective broad, we can send out our resume, we can send out our prospectus to a broader array of people that makes more potential jobs that we might land. And the problem is we get diffused, and there's a lot of other problems associated with that we talked about a couple of weeks ago with respect to getting all of our resources heading in the right direction. So again, our objective is not to help you hit the target, it's to help you hit the bullseye of the target. Now, there's a couple of resume cautions that are worth mentioning here very quickly. You ask 10 people about their opinion on resumes, you'll probably get 12 to 15 answers because some of them are a little bit schizophrenic. Everybody's got an opinion. I mean, I've seen people come through our workshop and they've been in our workshop for 3 weeks, and I see them offering their resume opinions to the person who just started brand new tonight, as if they're somehow now an expert after 3 weeks in the Career Solutions workshop. Everybody's got opinions, and it's okay. We just need to recognize that everybody's got opinions. Whose opinion are you going to listen to? Recognize that there are variations in structures. I don't spend and don't get real dogmatic about structure. There are some things that I'm going to recommend, but in every structural recommendation that I make, where you place the dates, which things you bold-face font versus regular-face font, I'm going to give you a reason to do it, or I'm not going to give you the instruction to do it. I want you to understand the logic behind doing it, and if you don't buy into the logic, don't do it. We want to remember that we need to avoid generics. Generic resumes were very, very important and very helpful 25 years ago. But over the course, particularly of the last 10 to 12 to 15 years, as with the advent of computers, word processing, now it is expected by employers, we're going to customize every resume. It used to be we'd have to type up a resume on a typewriter. I know some of you don't even know what a typewriter is other than it's an antique sitting in an antique store somewhere. You'd type up a resume, and once you finally got a good copy of it, because you didn't have word processing, if you hit the wrong key, you had to pull the paper out and start over again. And so after 2 or 3 hours of typing up a resume and finally getting an error-free document, you take it down to a printer somewhere and print 250 copies of it. So, and you get them printed as quick as you could before you got smudges on your original. And you had a generic resume that then went to anybody and everybody that you might think to send it to with respect to your job. Those days are gone. Every resume that we develop needs to be customized for that particular employer. Even to the degree, for example, I'll just give you one for right now. Let's say that you're looking for an administrative assistant position. I'm using that because it's a fairly broadly understood job by most of us. Administrative assistant position. Now, some companies call them administrative assistants. Some companies call them staff assistants. Some companies call them executive assistants. Some companies still call them secretaries. Some companies call them something else. Some companies might call them staff assistant 3. There might be a staff assistant 2, a staff assistant 3, a staff assistant 4, based upon the level of manager or executive that they report to. When you apply for a job as an administrative assistant, you need to change your, if you don't make any other changes, and you will, but if you didn't make any other, you need to change your title, your job target title, which is going to be prominently displayed. I'll show you some examples in a minute. You need to change the job target title on your resume to match the title used in that company that you're applying for. So if company A has a administrative assistant 2, you change that target job on your resume to say administrative assistant 2. If the next company you send your resume to, they use the title staff assistant XYZ, you put staff assistant XYZ as your target job. Why do you do that? If they see that you see yourself in their job, they'll start to see you psychologically, they'll start to see you in their job. And that's what you're trying to accomplish, among other things. And then the last caution, of course, is perhaps where we started earlier in this session, is what we need to remember: the purpose of the resume is not to get the job, it's to get an interview, and that's all. It's to be an appetizer. It's not the main course. If you're writing your resume to get a job, there's going to be way too much stuff in it. And it doesn't make any difference whether it's a typewritten or a computer-printed resume that you're going to stick in an envelope and mail in, or whether it's one that you're attaching to something online. It needs to be brief. It needs to be short, which is why we always talk about resumes. And I don't want to get overly dogmatic about length, 1 page or 2. I'll talk about that in a second. Let me tell you what a resume is not. And I don't have a slide for this, so you might want to write some of these down. A resume is not a narrative. If you're writing your resume in paragraph style, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines to a paragraph, you're writing in the wrong style, in my view. It needs to be bullet points. Not a narrative. It's not a novel. It's just a lot of quick phraseology bullet points. Number 2, it is not designed to be all-inclusive. You're only putting in there things to whet, W-H-E-T, their appetite. Number 3, it's not to get a job offer, as I said, it's to get an interview. It's not an exercise in proper grammar. It's okay to use foreshortened sentences that are really just phrases. Doesn't have to have an object and a subject and a verb in it. It's not a recount of your personal life or hobbies. I remember the days, and some of you do, I'm sure, when you used to put personal hobbies on your resume. You used to put your spouse's name. You used to put how many children you had. You'd even put your children's birth dates on there. None of that stuff goes on there anymore. You don't even indicate whether you're married or you have children. It's not a document just of past history, but it's also a prospective document. Now, I want you to grasp this principle, if you will. This came to me several years ago. I don't know anybody else that teaches this, but I find this really fascinating, and I find it powerful teaching. I want you to think of your resume as a billboard on the side of a highway. And I've chosen a billboard to depict in our slide presentation here, which I think represents one of the most successful billboard campaigns, sales campaigns in the United States. I don't have any statistics to back that up, but I can tell you this is an extremely successful company, and most of their advertising money goes into billboards. It's not in print media, and I don't think I've ever seen a television or heard a radio advertisement for them. But as you're driving across country, especially from the center of the country to the eastern, through the center of the eastern half of the country, you will oftentimes see Cracker Barrel billboards along the freeway. And they all have the same thing that you ought to have in common with your resume. They have 3 things that are most important. 1, you always see, and it's different sizes and different billboards, but you always see their name, their logo. So you see the brand. Your brand is your name. It ought to be the most visible thing on your resume. In your oral resume, it ought to be the first and last thing you say. On your written resume, it ought to be the largest font on the page. You are the product. As I like to say, when you're marketing yourself for a job, you're the Frito-Lay, you're the Coca-Cola, you're the Lexus or the Cadillac. You're the brand. There's no, when you're driving down the freeway and you see that Cracker Barrel, you know it's a Cracker Barrel billboard before you can even read the rest of the text on the billboard. Before you can even read Cracker Barrel, just with the colors and the shape, you know it's a Cracker Barrel ad. The next thing that you'll see is some compelling reason. This might be your 1-2 punch on your resume, but you see some compelling reason why you might want to stop there to eat. In this particular case, breakfast all day. Some people like to have breakfast for dinner. They found that to be a very important little thing to say about what they do. You can get breakfast all day long at Cracker Barrel, and they're proud of it. It's a great breakfast place. They've got about 25 to 30 different versions. One might say good cooking and a general store. If you've ever been into Cracker Barrel, you know that they've got a fair amount of space devoted to a lot of stuff that they sell. Books and trinkets and toys and hats and games and candy and all kinds of stuff that they sell. They have a general store as part of their operation. There might be another one that says across the billboard, great home cooking. They're real proud of the fact that this home cooking, while it may not be the healthiest cooking in the world, it's just like Grandma used to make back on the farm. The point is they've got a 2 or 3 or 4 word slogan which tells you why you might want to stop there. And then the third thing that they put on there, every one of their billboards, is where they are. I defy you now to drive around and look at billboards on the side of the freeways. You'll see products advertised. You'll see restaurants, service stations, and other services, and you won't be able, when you look at the billboard, you won't be able to see or find out in looking at it where they're located. Well, what good does the advertisement do? When you see when somebody gets your resume, they need to know very quickly, here's your phone number, here's your email address, here's your LinkedIn address, here's how they get a hold of you. So who are you? What's the brand? Cracker Barrel. Where are you? You're at the next exit, then left. You're exit number 73. You're 17 miles ahead. There's different ways that they say it, but you always know where that Cracker Barrel is going to be. Always. They never leave those 3 things off, and that's all they put on there. Now, let me tell you why they keep it real clean and crisp, because they know that as you're flying down the freeway at 70 miles an hour, and in East Texas, 75 or 80 miles an hour, and in some parts of the country, even faster, they know that you're only going to see that billboard for a matter of seconds. Well, remember what I said earlier? Your resume is being screened in 6 to 15 seconds, and you're giving them something that's going to take 10 minutes to read. You think they're going to read all the words on that? Not a chance. They won't read all the words on it if they decide that you're the best out of the first 100 they look at, call you in for an interview. You think they've read that whole resume? Nope. They haven't. They haven't sat down and scoured it for all its great nuances, which is why the fewer words you say, I'll go back to our opening statement, the fewer words you say, the more will be remembered. If you put too many words, they're reading the wrong stuff and you're getting rejected because they haven't found the stuff they're looking for. You make it like a very difficult Easter egg hunt. Remember, you're driving down the freeway, you see Dave, you see Steve's, you see Mark's resume, and boom, I need to know that it's Mark, I need to know why I need to spend time with him, and I need to know how to get a hold of him. 6 seconds, boom, the billboard has passed me. I'm moving through these resumes as fast as I can get through them, and you think I'm doing it fast with my eyes. Wait till you get into the computer search. And now they're being identified through word search on the computer. You got to have the right words on there. It's not about what you did. Now it's not even about how well you did it. It's about making sure you got the right words to express it. All that stuff is extremely important. Okay. Don't forget the billboard. As you're driving around, look at the billboards and you'll see the successful ones. They'll have these elements on them. You'll see a lot of the unsuccessful ones, they try and put too much on, just like most job seekers with their resumes. They're trying to, there was just a couple of miles from here on the highway. For years, there was a restaurant, had a billboard up, and they had everything on their menu was on this billboard in picture form. Every dish they made. They had dishes of food. I mean, literally, it looked like they took a picture of a giant banquet table with everything they made was stacked up on this table. It was just a whole bunch of dishes of food. I bet I saw that billboard at least 500 times. It was only a few miles from my house. Every time I got on the road going one direction, I passed that billboard. I never once knew the name of the place. I don't even know if the name was on the billboard. And I still, to this day, it's long since been 10, I have no idea where they were. So even if I wanted to eat there because something I had time to stop and look to see what they actually made and served in this restaurant, I don't think I could have found them. Ridiculous. Good designers of these billboards are employing the same principles that we need to employ in putting together a good resume. All right, let's now talk about the actual design of the 2-minute drill. The 2-minute drill is the oral resume. There's 4 parts. You see them displayed here. Pre-career, early career, recent career, future career. 4 parts. 2 minutes. Each of the 4 parts is equally 1/4 of the 2-minute drill. If you take 2 minutes and divide it by 4, you find out that each of these parts is about 30 seconds long. If you sit down and write out your 2-minute drill, you'll find out that each one of these segments is about 2 to 3 average, not long and lengthy, 2 to 3 average sentences, period. So you got 2 to 3 sentences to describe your pre-career. The pre-career is that period of time up to about the first time you got your first real job. So the pre-career for many of us might be from birth up until 18, 20, 22, 25, depending upon what we may have been involved in. And it's everything that preceded our first real job. It might include some part-time jobs while you're in school. It might include your schooling. It might include things that you did, maybe if you had some jobs to help earn your allowance. I remember I had a paper route when I was in high school. All those kinds of things are possibilities for your pre-career. In my pre-career, I talk about the fact that I was the oldest of 4 children. And when I graduated high school, my father could not help us financially go to college, and he gave us a little pat on the hiney, and he said, Dave, Dennis, Jackie, Kathy, each of the 4 of us in turn, I hope you find a way to figure out how to get through college. I learned at a very young age that I was going to have to be very, very self-reliant. My mother and father both worked to make ends meet. And so I learned how to, and being the oldest child, I had a lot of responsibility thrust on me at a relatively early, I don't even say all of that, but those would be the potential things that might be in my pre-career. To talk about work ethic, to talk about early lessons learned in life, to talk about my value system. Then you get into your early career. Your early career is all the jobs you had with the exception of your last one. So my early career includes my work at Disneyland, where I had several jobs in a couple of different locations, both Anaheim and Orlando. It includes my early jobs at GTE, those early HR jobs as I got promoted up the ranks. And then my recent career, the next 30-minute segment, deals with the last job I had where I spent half of my GTE career as the VP of Human Resources. And so I devote about 30 seconds or 1/4 of the 2-minute drill, 1/4 of the 2-minute drill goes to just that most recent job. For some of you that might be wondering, why do you spend so much time on that job compared to all the other jobs you had before? Because that usually is the most relevant job. And that's what usually the job that most employers are most interested in because it was the last one that you had. Now, a lot of that depends upon how long you were in the job and what other jobs you had and the kind of job target, which is, by the way, when you get to future career, you're going to have a couple of sentences that basically you segue into talking about the future, and you introduce the fact that my job target now is, what I'm looking for is a job as a senior executive of human resources in a large, medium to large size service organization. with national and international presence. And so you typify your job target in terms of the position you want, the kind of organization you want to be in, the kind of responsibility you want can all be summarized in that sentence or two. And so in my 2-minute drill, it's very, very quickly, I'm going through what I did before I went to work, what I had in my early jobs, what I did in my last job, and what I'm hoping to do in my next job. 2 minutes or less, 2 or 3 sentences in each section. When you're nice and crisp and you learn to do that and you write it out and you get it memorized and it becomes very conversational, it has huge power when you're sitting in front of an interviewer and they say, "Tell me about yourself." It looks like you've got it together. Instead of so many people, the vast majority of people just ramble from one thing to the next because they're not pre-planned, they're not pre-prepared to answer the question. We all think, well, we know us better than anybody knows us. We can all tell us about ourselves. That's true, but can you do it effectively? Can you do it with power? And then you'll see this little thing down here at the bottom. We always end our 2-minute drill with an open-ended question. It's a question that can't be answered with a one-word answer. Yes or no, up or down, left or right, today or tomorrow. If a question can be answered with one word, it's not an open-ended question. So you might ask a question at the end of the 2-minute drill. You might turn to your interviewer and say, by the way, could you tell me what are some of the characteristics that you're looking for in the successful candidate for this job? That's just one example. And so now you're getting them to start, you do a couple of things with your open-ended question right up front. You let them know that you expect this to be a dialogue, not just a one-way interrogation. You also let them know that you have interest in this job and you want to learn some stuff. And by the way, if you ask the right kinds of questions, they're going to start giving you information that will help you better frame the rest of your answers during the interview. Because now you know what's important to them if you ask that kind of a question. And you ought to, every 2 or 3 or 4 questions, you ought to be prepared to sprinkle in more questions. We'll get in that when we get into our session on interviewing. Now, if you look at handout 5.2, you don't necessarily have to turn there now. It's a worksheet. It's a 1-page worksheet. It just asks you to kind of write down some things about your past and about your future for all 4 of the sections of this. Just jot down notes. Scribble stuff in there as you begin to think about what am I going to say about my pre-career, my early career, my recent career, and my future career. In other words, get some ideas on paper first, then sort of craft sentences around them once you decide what it is you want to talk about. That's your 2-minute drill practice sheet or worksheet. And then over in handout 5.4, we actually have a sample 2-minute drill. It's a typed out 2-minute drill. This is a real drill. Matter of fact, in our next session, I'm going to have the person that actually originally wrote this drill, who's going to actually come to our next session, and I'm going to have him up on stage, and I'm going to ask him the question, tell me about yourself. And you can pull this out and see how close he gets. Now, he hasn't used this for years. He wrote this 2-minute drill when he landed his last job about 9 years ago. And only occasionally do I have him come up and from memory, I ask him to tell me about yourself. And he does pretty good. He gets really close to 2 minutes every time he delivers it. It's always said a little bit differently, but fundamentally he's got all the pieces together. That's the 2-minute drill sample sheet if you need to see what one actually looks like. Now let's go on to the 2-page resume, the written resume, because I know that's why a lot of you folks are here. 2-page resume used by everyone. It obviously has some limitations, and it's misused by both job seekers and hiring managers alike. We just know that there's some fundamental drawbacks, but this is a world that requires resumes. This is a world where managers think they want to see something to screen from before they decide who they're going to bring in and who they're not going to bring in. And so let's move along with the 2-page resume design. I'm going to talk about several things. I want to talk about the length and the layout and the things you put in and the things you leave out. The length, for example, should be 1 to 2 pages. Now, don't get overly dogmatic. If you have a very technical job, a scientific job, where you have to use a lot of scientific and technical terminology, because to show your depth and breadth of your technical understanding, those resumes might be a bit longer than 2 pages. Just recognize that as you go past 2 pages, you begin to start to lose credibility in terms of your ability to succinctly summarize your background. There's been a lot of discussion over the last few years, should your resume be a 1-page or a 2-page resume? I'm going to both ask and answer the question. Is your resume better off being a 1-page or a 2-page resume? It's always better the shorter you can make it. If you can say in a page and a half what you currently have on 2 pieces of paper, say it in a page and a half. If you can say it in a page and a quarter instead of a page and a half and get the same impact, say it in a page and a quarter. This isn't because you got space, you ought to go ahead and fill it up. That's the wrong attitude about this. If you don't need the words, strike them. If you can say in 4 words what you've been saying in 12, say it in 4 words. Make the impact with the reader, because they're only going to give you 6 to 15 seconds. So those people that are dogmatically saying your resume needs to be 1 page, here's what I see when people think they have to write a 1-page resume. They take their font down to a size 9. They shrink their margins to a 1/4 inch, top, bottom, left, and right. There's no space between any of the sections. Oh, they get that page and a half resume crammed onto 1 sheet of paper, but I want you to get this. If you don't write down anything else in this session, write this down. The length of your resume is not determined by the paper you use. It's determined by the number of words you're using. So a 9 font is not decreasing the amount of words, even if you can cram it onto 1 sheet of paper. That doesn't help them read. It makes it harder to read. I'd rather have 2 pages in a font 14 so I don't have to strain to see it. Understand that. This is about the ink, not the paper. When people are, now, most people that tell you, well, you need to have a 2-page resume, you need to have 1 page, you ask them why, and most people won't know why. Well, it's just better. Why is it better? It's because you don't give them as much to read, not because you've made it so small you can cram it onto 1 sheet of paper. And there's a big difference. This is about, if we go back to what Will Rogers said, if we go back to that proverb that I quoted at the beginning, this is about saying things. If we go to the billboard example, this is about saying what we need to say in as few words as possible. Fewer words have power, and that's what we're looking for in our resume. Okay, let's move on to layout and length. The layout ought to be very professional. I can't tell you how many resumes I look at. Somebody actually gives me a resume and it's got handwritten corrections. Oh my gosh, that's terrible. Don't ever give anybody, I mean, you let them know you're going to email them a resume as soon as you get home. You don't have any current ones with you. Don't give them a handwritten, corrected resume. Well, you know, I've changed addresses. Let me write my new address and phone number on here. Oh my gosh, that was a mistake you made before you left home. You shouldn't leave home without a current resume. It ought to be a good font, usually a well-used font. I have 2 friends that go out and they find all these fonts they can find. They must have thousands of fonts they find out on the internet. Use the more commonly fonts. If you want a sans serif font, perhaps Verdana, perhaps Tahoma, Arial. If you want a serif font, maybe a Times New Roman. The more frequently used fonts. Why? Because that's what people expect. They're not looking for you to get creative in some kind of font they can't even read. Next, you need to make sure that you're using bright paper. If you're going to use white, use really bright white. I always say use at least a 98 brightness or more. On the resumes that I have produced for myself in the past, I've used 108 brightness or more. Now, the other color that you might use, if we're talking color of paper, you might use a linen color, a beige or an ecru. That's fine. Do not use blue, pink, yellow, or any other pastel. Okay? And use a heavy bond. If you're using that recycled, I always inappropriately refer to it as Xerox paper. If it's copy paper, if it's the free paper you get when you turn in your ink cartridges, you're using the wrong paper. You're saving a penny and you're costing yourself thousands of dollars in job offers to save a penny. Spend a few bucks and get some good paper. At least 24 pound, I use 28. Get a paper so that when they get the paper and they feel it, it feels rich. It has an impact. You're dealing with psychology with your resume as much as you're dealing with your work background. No clutter. Make sure that your margins are 1 inch to 1.25 inches. Don't shrink those margins down so you can get a few more words on the page. Figure out how to get the words off the page so you can have a nice big, resume readers, and particularly if they've got you in for an interview, they like all that white space between sections on the resume and around the edges so they can make notes. You're taking away all their note space when you try and cram all those words on there. In terms of the emphasis, we know that in America, we typically write things top to bottom, left to right. So we want the most important stuff at the top compared to the bottom, on the front page compared to the back page, and we want the most important stuff on the left compared to the right of the page. Because most people are going to start at the top and work down the left-hand side. Their eye is just going that direction. So we want the real value words, and you'll see that when I show you some examples. You want the stuff that's most important on the front page. If you do this right, many of you will get interviews with what's on the front page. They'll never even read the back page. Oh, they might take a quick 1 second look. Now, I don't know whether you noticed in our skit earlier, Terry going through those thousands of resumes that he was going through. Those were all multiple page resumes, and seldom did he even turn to the second page. Seldom. That's the way most resume screeners are. If you don't get them in the first page, you're certainly not going to get them in the second. You didn't save some great gem that's on the second page. Graduated kindergarten when you were 3. They don't care about that. Unless you're just 4 now and it was a recent occurrence. Omissions. Let's talk about the things we want to make sure we leave off. I've actually seen resumes in recent years where they write resume across the top. That's why these pencil manufacturers that write pencil on the side of a pencil. You know when you get a pencil, you know it's a pencil. They don't need to go to the expense of printing pencil on the side, and you don't have to go to the expense of putting ink on the top that says resume. Nor should you have on the bottom of usually the bottom of the resume, a lot of job seekers put references available upon request. You don't have to do that. That's a given today. If we need resume references, you're going to give us references, or we stop the discussion. So yes, we know your references will be available whenever we request them, and who knows when that will be. You don't need to have things on there like objective or hobbies. Those are all unimportant, irrelevant words. If you look at I believe it's still in the Microsoft Office template, and maybe one day after we get this videotaped, we can send the videotape to Bill Gates, although he's just stepped out of the CEO job at Microsoft, and he's now just an advisor, so he may not care what's in Microsoft Office Suite, but they have a resume template in Word. They also have a resume template, by the way, in Microsoft Publisher. And that template still has something that worked when Bill Gates was just getting out of college. And it's got the word objective, and some of you still have objective on your resume. Take it off. I'm not saying that you don't want an objective on there. That's your job target. But you list your job target. You don't list the word objective. In place of the word objective, put the job title that you're looking for. Right in the same place you would put the word job objective or career objective. It's a word you don't need. If they see your name, contact information, and the next word on there is administrative assistant, chief financial officer, CEO, sales administrative assistant, sales manager, technical quality assurance manager, they know that's your job target. They know that that's what you are. Let's go down to the last one, the 2 styles I want to talk about in this session, and the hierarchical style is a version of the chronological. Let me say this, don't have time to go into it. I'm going to do a radio show on it soon, and it's why functional resumes are taboo. Don't use them. I don't care what you paid to get that advice. Do not use a functional resume. A functional resume has been designed and used for one purpose and one purpose only. Is to disguise problems in your background. And so when people see a functional resume, the first thing they think of, this is a loser. They know that you're trying to hide something and you lose points for integrity. Don't use them. And there are professionals out there advising to use functional resumes. There are people charging hundreds and thousands of dollars to design one for you. Don't use them. I've never met a hiring manager or a recruiter, and I told you I've met hundreds and thousands of them, who wants a functional resume. They throw them in the trash. Don't use them. They do you no good. I'm going to talk about two styles, the chronological or inappropriately named because it's actually reverse chronological, where we list the jobs in reverse chronological order. And then we're going to talk about the hierarchical style, which is a variation on that. Still's got the reverse chronological order, but it's got that 1-2 punch in it, and I'll show you how that looks in a second. The chronological resume that we're going to talk about, that's what most recruiters want to see. It's easy to follow. That's one of the reasons. They know where to look for stuff. Two, it has a drawback. It doesn't always highlight your results. Let's say that some of your best accomplishments were 3 jobs ago, and that's over on the second page of the resume. We want to get that best accomplishment, particularly if it's important for the job target you have. We want to get that up on the front page. We're going to show you how to do that. The reason that it's important is it's the most expected, it's the most seen. This is not a time to get creative and invent your own resume style. Not a time to be creative. And I'll guarantee you that chronological resumes are going to be required by headhunters if you're using that kind of service. So let's get launched in this real quick in the short time we have left. The 2-page resume hierarchical design. It's going to have all the elements of the chronological plus this one little added piece that I'm going to show you. The 1-2 punch is what's right up front in front of your work history. That handle and result that we talked about earlier. It has all the chronological elements to it. It has power in it. And sometimes people will get interviews scheduled before the employer ever even gets down to your work history. That's how much power is in the first half of the first page in a 2-page resume on a hierarchical design. So let's move on to that design. The first thing on this resume, always, I can't imagine why somebody would put their name and address on the second page. That'd be like putting it on the back of the billboard. If you really are serious about finding Cracker Barrel, drive around to the back of the billboard and write down where they are. Not going to happen. Name and contact information. The thing I'll say about name is it always ought to be, I sort of liken the name on your resume to the way we fly the American flag in the United States of America. We know that no flag, in terms of flag protocol, should ever fly higher than the American flag. Other flags can fly as high, but you never, when the American flag goes to half-mast to celebrate the passing of someone, to commemorate the passing of someone, all the other flags come down to at least half-mast as well. Nothing ever flies above the American flag, ever in this country. And nothing on your resume should ever have a font bigger than your name. You can have other fonts as big as your name, but your font for the name, your name on the resume, ought to be the biggest font that you use. 14, 16, maybe even bigger. Can you get too big? Yeah, it looks like it gets out of balance. You might have to play around, print off a couple, see how they look. Remember your name. Your name ought to be the name that you introduce yourself by. If your name is Mark Baker IV, and you're proud of the fact that you're a fourth, but every time you introduce yourself and I met you and you said, hi, my name's Mark Baker. I call you up on the phone, you say, hi, this is Mark Baker. I want to know why you're putting the fourth on your resume. It's causing a little bit of an issue with respect to your brand identity. If you go by, you say, hi, my name's Bob Smith, but on your resume it says Robert K. Smith. If you're not introducing yourself as Robert K., kill it. You're Bob Smith. The only time, that's my official name. That's great. Put it on your W-4 after they hire you, so that it links up with your Social Security information when they send in your Social Security deduction every month. You do not need to have your formal name on your resume if that's not how you introduce yourself. This is about branding. If you're Bob Smith, you're Bob Smith. That's who you're selling, Bob Smith, not Bob Smith here and Robert K. Smith over here. You're going to confuse people, especially with a common name like Smith and Bob. Robert K. Smith can be another person altogether from Bob. I'm not sure which one of them I wanted to invite in. I forgot. Contact information, mailing address, telephone numbers, numbers, email address. Now, I want to address this. In some parts of the country, and this seems to be true around here, there seems to be some sort of fad going on that says you shouldn't put down your home address on your resume. When I ask people, well, that's what they advised me to do. Well, did they give you a reason why? Yeah, it's for security purposes. Give me a break. Your address is in the phone directory. If you own property, your address is in the courtroom. Register. I mean, you're only sending your resume to people you want to have your resume. Why would you take your address off your resume? Let me tell you, I know that this isn't true of everybody, but if it's true of even a small percentage, you don't want this to happen. There are many, many HR recruiters that when they see a resume without an address, they think of one or two other possibilities for you. One, you're incarcerated. Or two, you're actually trying to get a job down here in this labor market from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And they know that you're not going to give them much consideration if they're 1,500 miles away. So they don't put their address on there. And so many people see these, and if they don't know what your contact is, that's why I advise some of you. I know that telephone numbers are portable. I keep getting calls from on my cell phone from people all over the country that I don't want to talk to. They're taking surveys, they're marketing companies, they're selling political candidates, whatever they're doing. They're people that and there are these pre-recorded messages that we're just getting bombarded with. I'm getting to the point where I'm not answering calls from out of the area phone numbers that I don't know. So if you've got a Detroit phone number because you migrated from Detroit 4 years ago, I want to encourage you, if you're in job search, you get a local area code because it can make a difference. Post office boxes. I know some of you like to get, I've met several people that prefer to get their mail at a post office box. That's fine. But you know, if you're in prison, you can get a post office box in any community to make somebody think that you're actually living in that community instead of incarcerated in a state prison somewhere else. That's what recruiters think. There's nothing wrong at all with putting your street address down, even if you don't get your mail there. Let them know where you live. Now, if you've got multiple phone numbers, as some people have got 2 phones, 3 phones, 5 phones, 7 phones, 29 phones, just put down 2 at the most, the 2 most likely that you're going to be most easily contacted with. Let's move on. The 1-2 punch is the next thing on there. Name, contact information, 1-2 punch. The 1-2 punch. Handle, accomplishment. Handle, accomplishment. I recommend having 3 to 4 of these and no more. Even though you're going to get 10, 12, 15 of them, you want to pick out the 3 or 4 that best suit you for the job in that employment and that employer that you're applying for, in terms of what they're looking for. Excuse me. I want to get through these real fast so I can show you some examples. Then we get to our work results, our work records, and we want both results as well as skills. Well, yes, I answered phones. How many did you answer, and how good were you at it? I made travel plans. Never once sent my boss to a continent that he or she was not supposed to land on. That's how good a travel planner I am. I'm being facetious only to make the point. We want to talk about not only what we did, but how well we did it. Then we get to our professional credentials. It might be certifications. We move down into education. These last few things, you've got to determine which ones you're going to list first. When I get down to these less important things, they're usually on the second page of the resume. I always ask this question. First, should I include this on this resume? Is it going to make any difference to them scheduling an interview for me to come in and talk to them? Are they going to want to know this information? And if they're not going to want to know it, don't leave it on there just because you're proud of it. You may have designations, you may have accomplishments. For example, I'll give you a good example of two of our graduates here in our workshop, husband and wife. They went through the workshop at different times, and it was after Julie landed her job. 6 months later, her husband went through the workshop. He landed his new job after about 6 months. So it was about a year's period from when Julie started to when Bob finished. My wife and I went out to brunch with them one Sunday, months after Bob landed his job, and I found out, and I didn't even know till that time, that both of them have PhDs. They both have advanced degrees. They didn't have it on their resumes because it wasn't important for the kind of work they were looking for, and all it was going to do was confuse the readers. So you put down what you need to get them interested in you, and you leave off the other stuff, even if you're very, very proud of it. There's no rule that says you have to put down every degree, every course you ever took. You don't have to list every skill that you've got and everything you've ever accomplished. Now, how do we get these resumes right? And then we're going to look at some. We get these resumes right by first doing an outline, then we do a draft, then we get some critique, we do another draft, we get some critique. I would say that the average good resume, and by good, needs to be good in your eyes based upon what you know about resumes. But the average good resume is going to take 6 to 8 drafts. You can't get from where you are to where you need to be in just one iteration. It's going to take getting some feedback, fine-tuning, learning how to say it 6 words in 5, 5 words in 4, 4 words in 2, 3 bullets into 1, 2 bullets, 2 bullets into 1 bullet. If you can get it said in fewer words, that takes a little bit of skill and some work to get that done. Now, if you'll look at handout 5.3 in your manuals, this is called Building Your 2-Page Resume. Again, this is a 1-page worksheet to just get you to begin to think about things that you're going to want to include on your resume. This is getting at some content stuff. Your target position, target companies, target industries, some of the activities that you've been involved in, the titles that you've had, responsibilities, your talents, your gifts, your motivations, your values, some of your achievements, accomplishments, results, your best results. Scribble all over this with everything you can think of. You don't have to use everything you put on here, but just use this as a place to do sort of a mind dump, a brain dump of all the stuff that might be potential to put on your resume. And if you have to, flip over to the back page. This is not getting sent to anybody, so you can scribble all over this and use as small a words as you want to. Now I want to draw your attention to some of these resumes that are in your manuals. Now this is where I always like to say this. There are people that aren't in this session tonight that have our manuals, and they see we have several resumes in this manual, and there are some people that have said, you really think I ought to do a resume like this one? I said, no. Every resume in this book has got major problems. These are not good resume examples. These are teaching resumes. So until I point out the good and the bad and the ugly on these, you're going to need to scribble on these as we talk through them. I want you to turn to handout 5.5. Handout 5.5 is the resume for Fran Executive. Obviously, these are real resumes. The names, addresses, phone numbers have been changed to protect the innocent. Been some, perhaps some other change, but these are generally what I saw from people that use them in our workshop. Now, Fran Executive, you'll notice that Fran has got their address and phone number. Notice the big, bold font for Fran's name. It's the largest font on here. We know who the product is immediately. It's like that Cracker Barrel logo that we saw. And then we immediately see, after reading Fran Executive, we might skip right over the email. We might notice that there's contact information there, but we don't really spend any time on it because our eyes are immediately then drawn to the job target, which is the specialty retail executive. The only time I've ever seen 2 lines for this, but in Fran's case, the specialty retail executive at the CEO, COO, or president level, oftentimes interchangeable interchangeable terms, excuse me. And then, with no more than 3 lines, 1 to 3 lines, what Fran has done is describe themselves in that job. And you always write this down out here in the margin somewhere. You always write this little up to 3-line description of you and the job in the present verb tense. You don't ever write it down as you're looking to become one of these, because companies don't hire wannabes. And you don't ever write it in the past tense as it's something that you used to do, because companies don't hire has-beens either. They hire ises. You need to be an is, a current. Fran is a current specialty retail executive. They're not used to be, not wanna be, they is. They are. Then you'll notice, now there's a mistake on this one, as I teach the resumes. They've got their achievements, and by the way, if you look at Fran's achievements, these 3 bullet points, they're really good. They're very impacting. But if they don't read them, there's no way that they could be summarized. If these had 1 or 2 or 3 word handles in front of them, they would have much more power. And after Fran added the 1 and 2 and 3 word handles, each of these 3 achievements had much more power. Because now they read the summary of 1 or 2 words, they read the achievement that goes with it, and they remember the achievement next time they look at the handle. They don't have to reread the entire achievement. Then you'll notice down in Fran's got the experience listed, name of the company, location of the company, the job title there underneath, and then the dates of employment out to the right. Remember, left to right, what's more important, the job that you held or the years you worked there? The job you held, of course. Do they want to know the dates? Absolutely. Now, I'm going to make one suggestion about dates of employment. I'm only say this one time. You'll see other examples of this as we go through a few more resumes. And here's the point I want to make. I always believe that with few exceptions, and I'll state what the exceptions are, with few exceptions, you always ought to have month and year. Now, there are some people who say, oh, year's fine. Ask them why. Why is year okay? Well, because if you put down year, like let's take Fran's here, in terms of being the consultant of special projects from 2002 to 2004, we want them to think that it was the full sum and substance of all 3 of those years. We want them to think it was a 3-year job. Well, most readers of resume know that this could also be 1 year and 2 days. The last day of 02, 03, and the first day of 04, and then they stop working there. What do you think most employers think when they see nothing but years, particularly on short-term employment? They think the worst, not the best of you. It looks like you're trying to hide how long you were there. And I'll guarantee you, when they have you fill out their application, they're going to ask for month and year. So put it on the resume. You get points for being honest. You get points for your integrity. There's the exception where you don't have to put down months when you've had a year. On my resume, I don't have months on my resume. Well, Dave, you're violating your own principle. No, here's the exception. For one employer, I worked 6 years. For my next employer, I worked 26 years. They don't give a rip about the month I started and stopped. Whether it was 24 years or 26 years, it was a long time. The months become irrelevant. But if you had one job from 1999 to 2000, another job from 2001 to 2002, another job from 2003, 2004, trying to hope that everybody thinks these are all 2-year jobs, and they could have been 2-month jobs with lots of dead time in between, they're not going to think well of that. That's just my encouragement to you. And notice the bullet points under there, a good job there in terms of the bullet points. Under the achievement section, what I call the 1-2 punch section, where we don't have the first punch, just the second punch, the achievement section. Those are the major achievements. Notice when you get down under experience, under the employment, there are more achievements, just lesser achievements, not the most significant ones. So you want your resume to be loaded with things that you accomplish, loaded with your results, quantitative or qualitative accomplishments. Flip over to the next resume, handout 5.6. Got to go quick now. This is Bonita Angel. Notice that Bonita has her professional designation. She's a HR person, and she's a professional in human resource. That's like a CPA to finance is a PHR to HR. That's her professional certification. Passed a test. Shows a minimum level of capability, credential, and accomplishments. Job target, corporate recruiter. Notice the handle and a two-line explanation of being a corporate recruiter, and then notice the accomplishments section there. You could call it accomplishments, achievements, results, doesn't matter, all gets the same nuance. Notice there's 3 handles and 3 accomplishments. Well worded, 2 lines each. They do not need to be long and laborious. They need to be as quick as you can get the point across. If you can say it in a line, say it in a line. Then go down to professional experience. Notice the employer there. Introduce something I haven't talked about yet, but notice under Zale Corporation there is a line, one line and one line only in italics, and that's referred to as a company byline. Write that out to the side, the company byline. The company byline, basically, you want to have the most positive thing you can think of about the organization. It might be the organization's slogan. For example, the byline that I put behind Disney on my resume, this I'll tell you why in a second. The byline says world's, not countries, not California's, world's premier family entertainment company. It didn't come off of their corporate literature. That was my terminology, but that's what they are. They're the world's premier family entertainment company. Now, here's a notion. If you can think of the absolute best thing you can say, whether they've said about themselves and you adopt that on your resume, or it's something that you would describe them, here's the psychology behind this. If they are the world's biggest, the world's fastest, the world's best, the most exclusive, the first to do this, that, or the other, whatever you say in that one line, if they are really great at something, and you've been working there, by extension, you're great too. They couldn't be great unless they hired great people. That's why if you worked for Enron Corporation, you need to put the byline under Enron, the most positive thing you can think of about them. Not the fact that the CEO and the CFO took everybody's shirt away. That isn't something you'd say about them. You'd talk about the most positive thing you could say about them. And you'll notice she's got a byline there by Zale Corporation. If you flip over to the next page, there's a byline there under the second employer she got listed, Homecomings Financial Network, a leading lender and mortgage servicer subsidiary of GMAC. Under the next employer, Connexus, third-party administrator for Cobra and Section 125 cafeteria plans with 50 employees. Not a real high, important quality thing, but she's got a byline there. Are bylines necessary? No, but if you can think of good ones, if you put one under one company, put one under all the companies so you're consistent and keep them to one line, and they can have a lot of power. Again, by extension, if they're really good at something, really great at something, really the best at something, they're number one, you're number one too. You're part of the team. Let's move on to the next resume. Resume 5, handout 5.7. Notice that Don K. Riz is this candidate's name, contact information there, and then notice the Vice President, Director, Corporate Development is the job target with a 3-line explanation. Current verb tense, not past, not future, but current. In Don's case, he's got 4 handles with 4 accomplishments. Now, when Don first did this, he had 4 handles and 8 accomplishments, and he had so much under this, what I call the 1-2 punch achievement section, that his first employer was on the second page of the resume. That's not good either. You don't need to shoot all your bullets on the resume. 3 or 4 accomplishments, if they're good ones, are plenty. Again, you want to just titillate them enough to have them invite you in. Turn over to page 2 on this resume. Page 2, I want to point out a couple of things that are really kind of fascinating. I want you to look at the dates that are in bold text down the right-hand side of the page of this resume. It looks like a second grader lined them up. They're all supposed to be right justified. I have no idea what happened in this case. I don't even remember what Don said when I pointed out, but I certainly wanted to use this as an example. First off, he's using years only. And when you've had some of these jobs, this job was a couple of years, and this job was a couple of years. I don't see any reason to ever bold the dates, Remember, you want to use bolding as little as possible, because the more things you bold, the more it confuses the eye. You want to bold the things that you want them to, if they don't see anything else on the resume, what do you want them to see? You want to draw the bolding draws their attention as long as it's not overused. Notice under education, he bolded the degrees that he got, not where he got them. And that would be true for most of us. We have to ask the question, is the reader of our resume for the jobs that we're applying, are they going to be more interested in the degree that we received or where we got it? And that's the one you bold. For your employment, are they going to be more interested in the company you worked for or the job title you held? And however you answer that question, that's the one you bold. You don't bold both. That gets them all confused. Just one, job title or employer. I want you to go all the way over to a handout 5.8. This should be the resume for Elliot Guess. Everybody find it? Nod of heads. Okay, Elliot Guess. Now, this is a very unusual resume in the sense that, number one, when you look at it, you can read this for 5 minutes and never figure out what his job target is. Now, when you look at his achievement highlights, he's got 2 bullets with two results, 2 handles and 2 results. They are really impacting. The font's too small, hard to read, but he does have them there in a good place. And they're powerful, but we still don't know what kind of work he's looking for. Now go down to, he's got something that I've never seen on a resume before or since. The section after achievement highlights before professional experience. Notice he's got 4 testimonial statements, a couple of which he took off of previous performance appraisals. He's got written testimonials that he's put on his resume. This resume, by the way, got him several interviews, and one of those interviews, he was hired. So I'm not saying it's ineffective. It's a really goofy-looking resume in many ways. The font's too small. There's too many words on it. But those first 3 items on there, his achievements, what past managers have said, really had some impact. Now, if you look at his second page, it's even worse than the first page. All kinds of indentations, again, small text, different bullets. He's got 1 tab in, 2 tabs in on a couple of these jobs. It's laid out really goofy. It looks like it was laid out by an unprofessional, a non-professional. Go to the next resume, 5.9. This is one I made up just to illustrate a couple of things. This is take a chance. Take a chance. Take a chance. A product development manager. See all these lines on here? I just want to illustrate. If you put all these lines on a resume, all the resumes that are now being stored in employer software, these lines, tables, headers, if you're using headers, if you're not using headers or you don't know what they are, you're probably not using them. All those things mess up that software. So get rid of the headers, get rid of the footers, get rid of the lines, get rid of the tables, set it up as a text document. Good text, good fonts, but you don't need all those lines or borders. Okay, that's our sample or resumes. When you think about all the things that you could put in a resume, start thinking about all the things you can leave out in a resume. In our next session, what we're going to do, I want you to bring 3 copies of your resume with you. It doesn't make any difference whether it's good, bad. You're not going to be handing them out to employers. Here's a case where pencil corrections are okay. If you've got your resume written on a napkin, make 2 copies of it. I don't care what it looks like. In this case, what I'm concerned about is where you are, so when you come in here next week, we can give everybody some feedback on their resume, everybody in here, so you can walk out of here more informed about your document than when you were when you walked in. If you could employ some of these things we've talked about tonight, that's great. If you don't have time to do that, that's okay too. The point is, we want to help you get your resumes better next week. Your oral resume and your written resume. Write up some kind of a 2-minute drill. Something. Put it on an index card. Write it on a napkin. Write it on the back of your hand. We want to critique your 2-minute drill, give you feedback on the content. We're going to measure how long it takes for you to say it, even if you have to read it. And then we're going to take a look at your written resume, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to critique your 1 or 2 page resume as well. Okay, let's pray and we'll go home. Thank you so much, Lord, for the opportunity to be part of this ministry. I thank you for each and every one who has attended. I thank you for each and every viewer who has watched these video recordings. And Father, I just ask that you would bless each and every person who's come to this ministry, that you would give them the tools necessary, give them the encouragement, and give them the wherewithal to employ these tools that they might be successful in their career transition. Again, thank you, Father, for this time together. Thank you for blessing this time with each and every one of us. Help us to have a productive week, and may we come back to our next session prepared, ready to honor you with the work of our hands. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.